Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel, hope you're all good and well. So time for a Saturday premiere, and for this Saturday I'm ranking the albums of the all-women heavy metal band known as Burning Witches. I will also be naming my top 5 favourite songs from the band as well, because they've just got 5 albums, so I thought I'd do a kind of second part of the video where I also name my top 5 favourite songs from the band as well. So if you don't know Burning Witches, they have a sound which is very reminiscent of those sort of old school new wave of British heavy metal bands like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. I also think they do have flavours of speed and thrash metal in some of their albums as well. You know, you get the odd song which is pretty fast paced, pretty fast tempo from time to time. And obviously in the vocal department, I feel that's where they bring in a bit of that power metal style with some shrieks and screams. Occasionally growls as well on occasion. But yeah, I think this is a really good band, and considering, you know, they've only been around since 2017, they were formed in 2017, that it's kind of like pretty amazing. They've put out 5 albums already at a pretty fast pace, like bands used to do a bit more kind of in the 70s and 80s, sometimes would release albums every year, and this band have almost done that. They've almost, since they started, almost released an album each year. In fact, I think last year and 2019 maybe the only years where they haven't actually released a studio album. So yeah, I mean, yeah, great bands, and the more I've dug into their discography, the more I've actually kind of got to like them as well. Even in preparing for this video, I've discovered some pretty awesome stuff. So let's crack on with this album ranking from my least favourite to my favourite. We start with number 5. Number 5 is their most recent album, The Dark Tower, and this is perhaps surprising because I still gave this an 8 out of 10, which is a really good score. For me, this is an album which, compared to the other albums, I feel like it takes a bit too long to get really into its stride, to the really good songs, the songs that I'm always going to go back to. I'd say that is maybe the primary reason for this album being my least favourite. The other reason is I don't think it's quite as polished. It doesn't feel as polished in its overall sound as the other. I know they've gone a bit heavier and some of the guitar tones sound a bit lower on this album, but it just doesn't sound quite as polished as the overall sound and the mix does for me on the other albums. Even with debut album, I just don't feel that as much, I think, having listened to The Dark Tower now quite a bit. But that said, I still love this album. It might be my least favourite, but I still love it. And that's just testament to, I think, a very consistent and strong discography from Burning Witches. So coming up next at number 4, I've decided on their debut album being next in the list. So their debut album is actually pretty awesome. You know, first of all, considering it's a debut album, you'd think the band were finding their feet here, but actually I think the band's found their formula quite early on, and that might be because, as I understand it, Romana Karkle, who started the band as the rhythm guitarist of the band, you know, she actively went out, I think, to find band members that wanted to be in you know, this kind of all-women heavy metal band. And I don't know what the process was, but it must have gone pretty smooth, because the band sound great from this very first album. And there are some great performances on here. I think particularly the thing that stood out for me from the first album and the second album as well, Hexenhammer, which I will come on to soon, is the vocalist, Serena Telly, who is the first and original vocalist for the band, and how good she sounds, and her vocal moments and her, you know, all of the singing parts, I think, on this album really stand out for me. And I just think also, yeah, there's good instrumental stuff. One thing I'd say why it's number 4 and not a bit higher, the debut album, I do think that it's at times, it's maybe just a little bit of a lack of imagination, just a touch. I would have liked more lead guitar work on some of these songs, or a little bit more happening. But the songs at their core are very, very good. Pretty memorable. You'll be singing along to some of the tracks. I think it's Bloody Rose and The Dark Companion. Really good track. I don't want to go too much into the tracks because I'm going to be naming those, my favourites at least, later on. So we move on now to number 3. This came out in that wonderful year of 2020. This is Dance with the Devil. And Dance with the Devil was when Laura Galdemond came into the band, of course, the first time, replacing Serena Telly. And, you know, she did a great job, I think, filling those pretty big boots. And the band on this album, I think, bring together some really good songwriting, some great songs. Um, a song on here that I think is really great, which I'll obviously talk about later. I don't want to spoil it for the top 5 tracks, but it just overall, it's a really cohesive album, I think. You actually get a touch of hair metal on this album with the title track, Dance with the Devil, as well. I think it kind of has that vibe of the 1980s kind of glam metal scene a little bit for me, and it's a cool track as well. And yeah, it's just a really good album, really solid album that came out back in 2020. So next up, number 2. My number 2 favourite album from Burning Witches is The Witch of the North. Now, you might have thought this would be my number 1 because it was high up on my end of year list for 2021. I said how much I loved that album in my review. I gave it a 9 out of 10, which obviously says, the next album is, I really rate highly. And I'm going to talk about that album in a second. But The Witch of the North, I think, slightly kind of more on the power metal side of things, this album, but it's done really, really well. I think the songs are immediate. Most of them are catchy. The only track I didn't like as much on this was Circle of Five. The rest of them I thought just hit great. Like I say, I think Laura, again, very good on this album. The guitar parts are great. The combination of Romana, Karkel and Larissa Ernst, who joined us for this album, I think, as well. And again, it's amazing how quickly the band members that come into this band after a band member leaving, how quickly they pick things up. And I think The Witch of the North is a really great album. Like I say, I stick with my 9 out of 10 for this album. I think it's a great album from Burning Witches. And I will talk more again about some of the tracks maybe later. And my number 1, my favourite Burning Witches album of all time as it stands, is 2018's Hexenhammer. And this is a hell of an album for me. And so much so, I have only known this album a couple of weeks, and I know some people will say, well, you can't possibly know in that time whether this album is really your favourite. But I don't know if for me personally, I really think that this is a fantastic album. It has it has so many great songs on it. I don't think there's a bad track really. Okay, there's an intro track, I think, but the rest of the album flows brilliantly. The riffing, I think, is at its best in this album. I think the vocals are also superb from Serena Telly, the former vocalist here. She is on top form in this album. I think she builds on the first album in such a great way in the way she delivers her vocals here, including just some fantastic shrieks and different styles of vocals that she brings to the table. But it's all pretty well contained in her own voice. She never feels like she's pushing too hard on her vocals either. I think Serena had just a natural fit for this band. That's not to say I don't like Laura. I think Laura is great, but Serena, I thought, for this album just delivered the goods on this album, and the whole album, instrumentally also, is pretty close to perfection. And I would say, if I did my 2018 list now, Hexenhammer could well be number 1 on that list. And sounds like I kind of am hyping it, but I think it's justified hype. I do think if you've not heard Hexenhammer, you like this style of heavy metal, old school sounding metal, bit of speed metal on that album. So if you like your Megadeth, you might even like Hexenhammer. Just listen to Hexenhammer. Come back and let me know what you think, because I think it is a bit of a hidden gem from 2018 and a bit fantastic as well. Alright, so that brings me to my top 5 tracks now, which I am going to go through relatively quickly here. My number 5 is Heart of Ice from The Dark Tower. My least favourite album. I thought it had a lot of good songs on. The title track was great. I could have chosen that, but I've gone with Heart of Ice. The reason is I think it has a moment on here that I just really, really like, and it's when Laura is, I think, on the final chorus, or maybe the last but one chorus. Can't quite remember now, but she sings... The way she sings Ice the last time, it's kind of just sounds really great and like kind of sends chills a bit down my spine. I think it just really fits in well with the track. I love the melodic guitar work on this song as well. I think that's really good. And yeah, it's just overall a great track. So number 5 is Heart of Ice from the Dark Tower album, their most recent album from this year. My number 4 is Thrall from The Witch of the North. A track which starts off a little bit like Holy Wars by Megadeth, but there's a lot to love in this track. The vocals, the chorus, the breakdown is absolutely brilliant, I think, where it just goes into this really heavy, really fantastic up-tempo breakdown. And yeah, it's just a great track with more great lead guitar work from Larissa Ernst here. It's just another cracking track from The Witches. Number 3 is Sea of Lies from the Dance with the Devil album. Oh, this is just another fantastic song. I think my highlight on this song is when you sort of have the bridge part, you know, when there's the change in the song, and you get Sonia Selder, who was the guitarist at that time. She hits the top note on that guitar and lets it ring out and kind of descends and glides down the guitar. And it's just a really great moment in the track. You have to listen to it really, I guess, to appreciate it. But and there's just a lot of great little subtle rhythm changes in the track I love as well. So that's my number 3, Sea of Lies. Go check it out. It's a great song from the Dance with the Devil album. Brings me on to my number 2. Number 2 is Executed from Hexenhammer. The album I just massively hyped. But Executed is such a phenomenal track to me. It really is good. And I think, you know, it's pretty short. Does not outstay its welcome one bit. It's just got this fantastic, like, speed metal style riff with Serena delivering this awesome kind of chorus where she kind of goes, executed under sentence of death. And it's just like got that fantastic fast riff going on in the background with the kind of hammer-ons and hammer-offs. I just think it's brilliant. And my final favourite track from Burning Witches of all time, my number 1 track, is actually from the same album, Hexenhammer again. I mean, I didn't pick any tracks from their debut album here, but I could give a few tracks from that album honourable mentions. But no, my favourite track of all time is the title track Hexenhammer. Now, this song is quite a long song, but it is great from the start to the very end. It has a fantastic guitar riff for the verses, I think, an amazing chorus from Serena, and an absolutely phenomenal guitar solo from Sonia Selder, who I think did a lot of great guitar work when she was in the band. And yeah, you just have to watch that one. It's just a great song. So that's it from me. That's my Burning Witches albums ranked and my top 5 tracks. Let me know how you would rank the albums, and also, if you want to, your top 5 songs from the band as well. Otherwise, from me, take care everybody. Until next time, bye for now.